The first thing you notice in a Manhattan jewelry boutique is how the world outside goes quiet. The city's constant soundtrack, sirens, horns, the endless shuffling of strangers, is replaced by a hush that feels almost sacred. I paused at the threshold, letting the door swing shut behind me. 1,000 points of light scattered off diamonds and gold, spinning patterns across the marble floor. For a moment, I wasn't Alison Bennett, 36, lawyer, slightly fraying at the edges from too many late nights and too little sleep. I was just a woman, possibly on the edge of a fairy tale. Jason touched my lower back with his warm, steady hand. It was the sort of gesture he'd used in the early years of our marriage, back when everything felt electric, uncertain, and entirely ours. I smiled up at him, catching the way the store's soft lights played across his features. He looked almost nervous, or maybe just distracted. We'd spent the Uber ride here making small talk about the new Trader Joe's opening up in Tribeca and the Yankees' chances this season, but beneath it all, there was something unsaid, a possibility humming just under the surface. I wanted to believe this meant something. We'd had a rough year. Work stress. His late nights. That gnawing sense, creeping in with the colder weather, that maybe romance had been replaced by routine. But now, stepping together into a place designed for declarations and new beginnings, I felt a hope I hadn't let myself feel in ages. What if he'd planned something special? What if, despite everything, he still saw me the way he used to? Jason glanced toward a display of men's watches, giving a little shrug. Just browsing, he said, but the way his eyes lingered on the sparkling cases suggested otherwise. I caught a glimmer there, a look I remembered from birthdays, anniversaries, those moments he'd orchestrated surprises in the past. It was like spotting the sun through New York fog, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but unmistakable if you'd ever seen it before. I felt my chest tighten with anticipation. Maybe he'd noticed how thin my favorite gold necklace had grown after years of wearing it, or remembered how I'd admired those delicate sapphire earrings on the cover of Vogue. Perhaps this whole outing was a setup, a way to tell me I mattered, that the best parts of Ieyasu weren't behind glass like these displays, but still alive, quietly burning, between us. The boutique itself was another world. Polished walnut counters, velvet trays, soft piano music drifting overhead. There was a sweet, expensive scent, amber perfume, new wood, and something almost citrusy. A couple near the window were whispering over an engagement ring. An older woman laughed with her granddaughter as they tried on pearl studs. Every detail was engineered for intimacy and awe. I wanted to soak it all in, memorize every moment, every detail. I let my fingers brush over a tray lined with diamond bracelets, then moved closer to a case filled with delicate pendants. My reflection mingled with the jewelry, a ghost among glittering promises. I imagined the moment, Jason reaching for a box, hiding a smirk, the thrill of not knowing until the last second. I smiled to myself, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, trying to look casual but feeling like a kid the night before Christmas. I remembered the first gift Jason had ever given me. We'd been dating just 3 months, and I'd confessed how much I loved vintage things. He'd shown up at my apartment one chilly November evening with a slim, tarnished silver bracelet, a little out of shape, but beautiful for its story. I saw this at a flea market in Brooklyn, he'd said. Reminded me of you. Simple, classic, a little bit mysterious. I'd worn it until the clasp snapped. It wasn't about price or flash. It was about being seen. Now, in this high-end store, with its velvet and gold, I wondered if he was trying to bring back that magic. I wanted to believe he was. I needed to. I pressed closer to a glass case, letting my eyes linger on a dainty necklace, the kind that caught the light with every breath. In my mind, I heard Jason's voice, lower, softer, telling the salesperson, "She'll love this one." My heart skipped. The thought of being cherished, of being the center of his attention for just one afternoon, was more intoxicating than any diamond on display. The room seemed to shimmer with possibility. Jason stood beside me, his stance casual, but his jaw tight. He always tried to look laid back when he was nervous, and I could sense the effort in the way he leaned against the counter, hands in his pockets. I longed to believe it was anticipation, a surprise waiting just for me. Behind his careful mask, I wanted to see pride, excitement, maybe even a little love. The salesperson, a woman in her early 40s with perfect nails and an easy confidence, drifted over. "Can I help you find something special today?" she asked, her tone practiced but warm. Jason gave her the same easy smile he used with neighbors and doormen. "Just browsing," he repeated, but his eyes flicked to me. "My wife has excellent taste. I'm just along for the ride." Something about the way he said it, soft, almost reverent, gave me another little spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he remembered who I was underneath the routines, the takeout containers, the laundry piles. Maybe this day would be different. Maybe this was our second chance. I didn't know, as I admired a row of rings glittering in their velvet beds, that one simple sentence was about to unravel everything I thought I knew. As I wandered further into the boutique, trailing my fingertips along the edge of the glass, I caught sight of my reflection again, this time lit up by the golden glow of the display lights. For a fleeting moment, I felt like the heroine in one of those classic old movies I used to watch with my mother on rainy weekends in Chicago before I moved to New York, a woman about to stumble into something that would change the script of her life. I tried not to let my expectations show. After all, Jason had never been predictable with gifts, sometimes a grand gesture, sometimes a thoughtful note tucked beside my coffee mug, sometimes nothing but a distracted hug and a rushed "I love you" on his way out the door. Still, something about the way he guided me through the store, his hand gently at my back, made me hope this would be one of the good days. I wanted to ask him outright, "Are we celebrating something? Did you plan this?" But I kept quiet, letting the moment breathe. Instead, I let myself imagine the scenarios, him choosing a necklace just for me, remembering how I'd posed in front of that display last winter, him presenting it later, maybe over dinner, that old mischievous smile lighting up his face, me pretending to be surprised but feeling, deep in my bones, known. I glanced sideways at Jason, watching him as he pretended to examine a row of sleek men's watches. He wasn't really looking at them. He never wore a watch, preferred his phone for the time. I watched the way his eyes darted around, not quite meeting mine. He looked handsome in that slightly disheveled, mid-tan casual way he perfected, checked shirt, jacket, hair still damp from the morning shower. There was a tension about him today, a restlessness that was both familiar and new. Around us, the boutique hummed gently, quiet laughter, murmured conversations, the subtle clink of a glass tray being set down. A couple nearby argued in whispers about diamond clarity. The saleswoman, with her perfect posture, circled back to us. "If you'd like to see anything up close, just let me know," as she offered, glancing between us. I smiled, nodding, but inside my stomach fluttered with nerves. It wasn't about the jewelry. Not really. It was about the gesture, the possibility that Jason was still choosing me, still remembering who we were before mortgage payments and conference calls and missed dinners started piling up. I wanted to believe there was room for romance, that after all these years, I could still be surprised. A memory flashed through my mind. Our 5th anniversary, when Jason surprised me with a spontaneous trip to Cape Cod. We'd eaten lobster rolls on the beach, walked barefoot in the surf, laughed until my sides hurt. For a weekend, we'd forgotten the world, and I'd felt utterly, completely cherished. That memory was a lighthouse I kept returning to, hoping the glow hadn't dimmed. Back in the present, I let myself dream a little. I pictured the scene, Jason taking my hand as we left the boutique, the thrill of a small, wrapped box hidden in his pocket, maybe a celebratory dinner at our favorite Italian place in the West Village. I felt my lips curve into a private smile, hope unfurling in my chest like a silk ribbon. Then, out of nowhere, a woman's voice, crisp and cheerful, cut through the gentle noise. "Mr. Bennett. So wonderful to see you again." My heart skipped. Jason's last name wasn't exactly rare, but the certainty in her voice left no doubt. The saleswoman smiled widely, stepping closer. "I hope Lindsay liked the bracelet you picked up last Friday. It looked perfect for her." Time slowed. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. Lindsay. I didn't know a Lindsay. My smile froze. The room grew very small, the air suddenly too thick. My heart, still buoyant from hope, plummeted straight through my stomach. I kept my face composed, instinctively slipping into the polite mask I'd worn through countless tense meetings and difficult family holidays. "Lindsay?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason's eyes widened. Panic, raw and immediate, flickered across his face. He let out a strained laugh, glancing nervously at me, then back at the saleswoman. "Oh, you must be mistaken," he stammered, waving his hand in a clumsy attempt at nonchalance. "I don't know anyone named Lindsay." But the words fell flat, scattered like marbles across the shiny marble floor. The saleswoman blinked, a flicker of confusion passing over her polished expression. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have mixed you up with someone else. It's been a busy week." She quickly recovered, launching into a pitch about their new spring collection, but I heard nothing but the blood rushing in my ears. I stared straight ahead, fingers gripping the strap of my bag until my knuckles ached. Every part of me wanted to demand answers, to make a scene right there in front of the sapphires and strangers. But I didn't trust my voice. I couldn't risk letting my hurt and humiliation spill out for all to see. Jason was talking, his voice a jumble of apologies and explanations I didn't want to hear. I nodded, pretending to admire a delicate ring in the next case, my mind already spinning with questions and doubts. Inside, I was sinking. But on the outside, I smiled, calm and composed, a woman made of marble, just like the floor beneath her feet. I don't know how long I stood there, pretending to be absorbed by a necklace I could barely see through the fog in my head. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Time lost all meaning in that brightly lit, softly perfumed space. The name Lindsay reverberated through my mind, echoing off the marble and gold, ricocheting through every memory I had of Jason and me. The saleswoman moved on, unaware of the fault line she'd opened. I felt Jason's eyes on me, searching my face for signs. Anger, tears, a question. But I gave him nothing. I'd learned, growing up in a house where arguments were staged and secrets were currency, how to keep my face unreadable when it mattered most. Inside, however, my mind was running wild. Who was Lindsay? What bracelet? Was this the first mistake, or just the first time he'd been caught? The pain of it was sharp, but the humiliation, being blindsided in public, in a place where I'd come hoping to be loved, was almost worse. Jason tried to pivot back to the moment, but his charm was unraveling at the edges. He pointed out a pair of cufflinks and made a joke about needing to dress better for meetings. His voice sounded too loud, too desperate. I smiled, nodded, let him fill the silence with excuses. I was listening for the truth, but all I heard was the brittle clatter of words falling short. A couple passed by us, chatting softly about wedding bands. Their easy laughter felt like salt on my wound. I wanted to escape, to run, to vanish into the New York crowds outside, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I clung to my mask, my last shield. "Let's check the necklaces over there," Jason suggested. Voice almost pleading. I followed, feeling myself detach, floating outside my own body, a spectator in the crumbling play of my own life. In the next section of the store, I forced myself to focus. I examined a strand of pearls, my face reflected a dozen times over in the mirrored case. Who did Jason see when he looked at me now? His wife of almost a decade, the woman he'd built a life with? Or just another comfortable fixture, a backdrop for his real adventures? The saleswoman returned, all bright smiles and professional warmth, presenting another velvet tray as if nothing had shifted. She'd forgotten her slip, or pretended to. I envied her. It must be nice, I thought, to be able to move on from mistakes so easily, to let the world spin on without consequence. But for me, the world had spun, and everything felt tilted and strange. I tried to picture Jason buying that bracelet for this Lindsay. Did he laugh with her the way he used to with me? Did he touch her lower back in crowded rooms, make her feel like she was the only woman in the world? Or was I simply a placeholder, someone to keep the peace while his real life happened elsewhere? My hands shook. I tucked them into my coat pockets, grounding myself with the feel of old subway tokens and a half-melted tube of lip balm. I could hear Jason's voice beside me, still trying to talk me back into the world, still building a wall of words between me and the truth. I kept my tone light, asking the saleswoman about the carat weight of a diamond pendant, but inside I was screaming. Who is she? How long has this been going on? But I wouldn't let myself crack. Not here. Not with strangers watching. Not with Jason hoping he could smooth over the mess with a nervous laugh and a credit card swipe. I replayed every moment of the past few months in my mind. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden urgency to shower right when he got home, the distracted kisses. Had I missed it all? Had I been so desperate for things to go back to the way they were that I'd ignored the signs, even as they stacked up like snowdrifts outside our apartment window? A tiny voice in my head tried to reassure me, maybe it's nothing. Maybe the saleswoman really did get the names confused. Maybe Jason is telling the truth. But I knew better. I'd trusted that voice before, and it had let me down. I realized, suddenly, that I didn't need to ask Jason anything in this moment. His panic, his scrambling, his refusal to meet my eyes told me more than any confession could. The real questions, the ones that mattered, would be answered in the quiet of our apartment, with no salespeople or strangers to bear witness. For now, I played along. I let Jason pay for a cup of store-brand coffee, let him guide me out the door, let the chilly Manhattan wind slap some color back into my cheeks as we stepped onto the sidewalk. We walked to the corner in silence, the city's noise swelling around us, swallowing our little world of hurt and pretense. Jason squeezed my hand, a nervous habit he'd picked up years ago when we'd first moved here. You okay? He asked quietly, almost as if he was afraid to hear the answer. I'm fine, I replied, my voice smooth as glass. Let's just go home. But inside, I knew nothing about this day would ever feel fine again. The cab ride back to our apartment in Brooklyn Heights was quiet. Jason tapped at his phone, staring out the window, while I watched the city blur by, a kaleidoscope of color and movement that seemed separate from my unraveling world. Normally, the ride over the Brooklyn Bridge was a comfort, the city skyline winking in twilight, the river catching gold and rose. Today, though, I barely noticed. My mind replayed the jewelry store, the name, the tremor in Jason's voice. I tried to analyze every word, every glance. Was he lying? Was there a way to salvage the trust that, moments before, had seemed unshakable? The city hummed outside, but inside the car, I was lost in memory. I remembered the way our home used to feel when we first moved in, boxes everywhere, our laughter echoing off the bare brick. I remembered slow mornings with coffee on the fire escape, the way Jason would read the news aloud and make up headlines just to make me laugh. Could that man be the same one sitting beside me now? I wanted to reach out, to demand the truth, but my anger felt frozen beneath layers of shock. When we reached our building, Jason paid the driver without looking at me. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the ache in my calves, the rhythmic thump of my feet to steady myself. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I'd rehearsed a dozen confrontations in my mind, but none of them seemed right. Inside the apartment, the familiar smell of lemon cleaner and coffee grounds wrapped around me. I dropped my bag, hung up my coat, and went straight to the kitchen. Jason hovered in the doorway. "Do you want tea?" he asked. His voice was tentative, small. "No, thanks." My answer was sharper than I intended, and he flinched. We stood there for a beat, two actors waiting for the cue that would let the scene move forward. I wanted to scream, to ask who Lindsay was, to demand he tell me everything. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and stared out at the city lights. The words stuck in my throat, anger and sorrow tangled together. Jason tried again. "About earlier. I really think she got me mixed up with someone else." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I'd always believed that silence could be more powerful than words, but now it just felt like drowning. He shifted, restless. "Allison, look, I know it sounded weird, but—" "It's fine," I interrupted. "Let's just drop it. I'm tired." He hesitated, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness, but I gave him nothing. Eventually, he drifted off toward the living room, turning on the TV. I could hear the familiar jingle of the sports highlight show, comfort noise for Jason, a distraction from the disaster growing between us. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the city. I didn't want to cry. I refused. If I started now, I might not stop. I needed something else, something solid, logical, indisputable. I grabbed my laptop and began to search. Receipts. Credit card statements. Email notifications. Anything that would make sense of the world that had suddenly stopped making sense. It was easier than I wanted to admit. Jason's digital footprint was everywhere. Calendar appointments that didn't line up, Uber rides to parts of Manhattan we never visited, charges from restaurants I'd never heard of, boutiques in Soho, a wine bar in the East Village. And there it was, a charge from the jewelry store dated the week before, under the name A Gift, Lindsay. I let the evidence pile up, piece by piece. I felt strangely calm, each new detail like a stone settling in my stomach. There was a power in knowing, even if the knowing hurt. I remembered waiting for Jason on those nights he was late, the dinners growing cold, the excuses growing thin. Maybe he's stuck in traffic, I'd tell myself. Maybe it's just a tough week at work. I'd light a candle, pour another glass of wine, and scroll through old photos, summer picnics, weddings, those early days when we'd built our own traditions out of nothing. Now, staring at the digital trail, I realized those sacrifices had all been mine. Jason hadn't been working late for us. He'd been elsewhere, living a life I wasn't invited into. I closed the laptop, the city lights flickering in the window like the last sparks of a dying fire. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew the woman who walked into that jewelry store earlier today didn't exist anymore. Jason came in, hovering awkwardly in the kitchen doorway. "Allison, are you sure you're okay?" I looked at him, a man I once knew inside and out, now suddenly a stranger. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm sure." He nodded, relief obvious, and disappeared again. Left alone, I let the quiet settle around me. Not the soft, warm quiet of a happy home, but a new kind, steely, cold, bracing. I realized I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I already had them. I just needed to decide what I'd do with the truth. Outside, New York moved on, relentless and indifferent. Inside, I was remaking myself, one breath at a time. I spent the next hour in a trance, scrolling through digital receipts, credit card charges, and calendar events. The further I went, the less I recognized the man I'd married. There were ride shares to addresses I didn't know, dinner reservations under names I'd never heard, even a few hotel charges from a work trip that, looking back, felt painfully suspicious. And every time I saw the name Lindsay in a receipt, or a meeting in Jason's calendar that lined up a little too well with the evidence, I felt another small piece of myself harden. But I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the urge to cry. Instead, I felt a strange calm, icy, precise, almost empowering. I printed the most telling emails and receipts, tucking them into a blue folder left over from some long-forgotten office project. Each piece of evidence was another stitch in a story I could finally see clearly, a husband who'd quietly rewritten our script, casting me as the background character in a life I thought we shared. My thoughts drifted to Lindsay. Was she some wide-eyed new romance, or just another secret Jason thought he could keep hidden behind passwords and plausible deniability? Had she known about me, or was she also living in the shadow of his carefully constructed lies? In the kitchen, the fridge hummed and the radiator clanked, filling the silence with the noises of a life still in motion. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the color deep and comforting in the overhead light. I didn't want to rage or shout. I just wanted to understand how I'd gotten here, how I'd missed the cracks forming beneath our everyday routines. I sat at the table, laptop open, staring at our old wedding photo pinned to the fridge, a faded Polaroid from our tiny city hall ceremony. We looked so young, so sure of ourselves. I wondered what that girl would think of the woman I'd become. My phone buzzed. Jason, texting from the next room. "Everything okay in there?" For a moment, I stared at the screen, wondering how to reply. The urge to type something honest, "No, nothing's okay," flashed through me, but I closed the message without answering. I wasn't ready to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break, not tonight. Instead, I started making notes, details, times, names, questions. It was a habit I'd learned as a paralegal, long before I ever passed the bar. Document everything. Trust the paper trail more than the promises. It was the only way I'd ever learned to protect myself. And slowly, as I catalogued the details of Jason's double life, something inside me began to shift. I realized I was done waiting for him to choose me. I was done making myself smaller, quieter, easier to love. If he could build a world without me, then I could build one without him. A plan started forming, not out of vengeance or spite, but out of the fierce instinct to reclaim my dignity. Jason deserved to be seen for who he was, and so did I. The days of hiding my strength behind polite smiles and forced forgiveness were over. I remembered a story my mother used to tell me when I was little, about a lighthouse on Lake Michigan that stood through every storm. It's not the waves you have to fear, she'd say. It's forgetting you can stand tall when the sky goes dark. Tonight, for the first time in months, I remembered. I finished my wine, closed the laptop, and tucked the folder into my bag. I'd have to play the long game, but I could do it. If there was one thing New York had taught me, it was how to survive the storm, and even find the strength to thrive in its wake. I took a shower, letting the hot water wash the day from my skin, and climbed into bed beside Jason, who was already half asleep with the TV flickering over his face. He mumbled something about work in the morning, and I murmured back, a good night, a steady and warm. But my mind was miles away, busy plotting a new kind of tomorrow. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer waiting for someone else to rescue me. I was ready to rescue myself. The next morning dawned grey and brittle, sunlight glancing off the East River and slicing between our blinds. I woke before Jason, mind already racing. For years, I'd greeted mornings by reaching for him, comforted by his warmth, the familiar rhythm of our shared life. Today, I let him sleep, rising quietly and wrapping myself in the certainty that things had changed. The plan formed itself as I sipped coffee at the kitchen table. Jason's birthday was coming up, and I knew he expected the usual, a dinner, a few close friends, maybe a weekend trip upstate. I pictured the way he'd lean back, content, assuming he was still the man everyone admired. But this year, I would give him something far more memorable. I spent the afternoon at my desk, making lists. Guest names, restaurants, florists, the best caterers in Brooklyn. But beneath those lists was a different kind of preparation, copies of receipts tucked in a slim envelope, bank statements printed and double-checked, a timeline matching his work trips to charges and calendar invites. Each detail made me feel steadier, stronger. Jason drifted in and out of the apartment, watching college basketball, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in our home. I caught him watching me once, a nervous edge to his gaze, but I smiled and asked if he wanted more coffee. He relaxed, reassured by my calm. That was always his mistake, confusing silence for forgiveness, mistaking composure for surrender. The following days moved with a strange, electric energy. I became an actress in my own life, laughing at Jason's jokes, discussing party plans, calling his friends and family to invite them for an extra special celebration. His mother was thrilled. His colleagues RSVP'd instantly. Even his boss, who Jason had always tried to impress, agreed to come. With every confirmation, my plan sharpened. I wanted an audience, a room full of people who'd witnessed our love story, who thought they knew us. I wanted Jason to see, maybe for the first time, what it felt like to have the truth laid bare. But it wasn't just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming the narrative, making sure the story of Alison Bennett didn't end with a whispered name in a jewelry shop. I wanted to step into the light and own the pain, the courage, and the new beginnings that came after. As the day approached, I kept up the performance. I let Jason see what he wanted to see, a supportive wife, doting, excited, maybe a little distracted by the details. I picked out a dress in deep navy, elegant but understated, the kind that made me feel grounded and strong. The florist delivered creamy white roses. The caterer promised the best local oysters. Everything was perfect, polished, a stage set for revelation. On the night of the party, our apartment glowed with candlelight and laughter. The city sparkled outside our windows, and I moved among the guests, filling glasses, trading stories, accepting congratulations for pulling off the surprise. Jason basked in it all, hand on my waist, beaming as he worked the room. His mother cornered me in the kitchen, eyes warm and soft. "You've always brought out the best in him," as she whispered, squeezing my hand. I felt a pang of grief for the life I'd tried so hard to hold together, for the version of Jason I'd loved so fiercely. But I didn't let it show. I watched Jason with his friends, his laughter easy, his guard down. I wondered if he had any idea what was coming, or if he truly believed his secrets were safe behind my smile. Finally, when the party was at its peak, guests buzzing from wine, conversation crackling, I slipped away to fetch the envelope from the bedroom drawer. My hands were steady. I returned to the living room and tapped my glass. "Can I have everyone's attention?" I said, my voice carrying through the room. The noise died down, all eyes turned to me. Jason smiled, expecting a toast in his honor. I held his gaze for a long moment, then turned to the crowd. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. For celebrating Jason, not just as a husband, but as a friend, a son, a colleague. I planned this party to honor him, to honor our story." The room hummed, people shifting expectantly. "And tonight, I want to share something with all of you. Something I discovered, something important." I placed the envelope on the table, the contents heavy with truth. Sometimes, we think we know the people closest to us. Sometimes, we trust them so completely that we forget to look for cracks in the foundation. Jason's smile faltered, confusion blooming in his eyes. I opened the envelope, sliding out the printed receipts and statements, letting everyone see the jewelry charge, the hotel bills, the text transcripts. I felt the collective shock ripple through the room. "Jason," I said quietly, "this is your story too. But tonight, I'm taking back my part in it." The room was silent. Jason looked at me, speechless. I stood taller, the city lights gleaming behind me, feeling, for the first time in months, whole. The silence that filled our apartment after my revelation was unlike any I'd ever known. It wasn't just the quiet that follows a loud noise, but a silence heavy and electric, one that demanded attention, respect, even awe. For a moment, no one moved. I saw my friends' faces, confusion and concern tangled with curiosity. Jason's mother raised a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes darting from me to her son. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their glasses halfway to their lips. Jason, for his part, simply stood there, caught between outrage and disbelief. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Allison, this isn't," he began, voice cracking, but I cut him off with a steady look. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said quietly. "Let's not add more lies to the pile." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Someone in the back set down their drink with a too loud clink. My heart was racing, but my hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt a strange, exhilarating clarity, like stepping outside after a storm to find the world newly washed, sharp and real. Jason made one last desperate reach for control. "Can we please talk about this privately?" he pleaded, his voice low, urgent, but I didn't budge. "We've had enough privacy," I replied. "Too much, maybe. This is my life too, and these people deserve to know who you really are." His mother looked at him, searching his face for a denial, for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But Jason was out of stories. The evidence lay exposed on the table, every page a silent verdict. Around us, the party collapsed into uneasy conversations. Some guests excused themselves, coats hastily grabbed from the entryway. Others hovered nearby, offering quiet words of support or awkward, sympathetic looks. I stood in the center of it all, feeling an unexpected relief. The truth was out, messy, public, irrevocable. There would be no going back to pretending, no more nights spent convincing myself that the doubts were all in my head. Jason sank onto the couch, head in his hands, his confidence finally stripped away. I watched him, not with hatred, but with a kind of detached compassion. He was reaping what he'd sown, forced to see, maybe for the first time, the consequences of his choices. I turned to his mother, who had tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I know this isn't the night you expected. But I can't be quiet anymore. I can't live in someone else's shadow." She reached for my hand, squeezing it. "You did what you had to do," she whispered, her voice thick with grief and pride. After the last guest left, I was alone in the glow of the city, the apartments scattered with the remains of a party that had ended in truth. I stood by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, 1,000 lights shining, relentless, indifferent. I'd always loved this view, its promise that life goes on, that endings can be beginnings too. Jason didn't try to talk to me that night. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. I sat at the kitchen table, my blue folder beside me, and let myself breathe. I thought about the girl I'd been when I met Jason, eager to be loved, quick to forgive, slow to ask for more than I was given. I grieved for her, but I also thanked her. She'd gotten me this far. Now it was time for someone new to take over. I poured myself another glass of wine, savoring the taste, the ritual. I replayed the evening, the moment when I'd finally chosen myself over comfort, over appearances, over another year of half-truths. For the first time in years, I felt like my own best friend. As dawn crept over the city, I started making plans. Not revenge, just freedom. I would call a lawyer, start looking for a new apartment. Take long walks by the river until the ache in my chest eased. I would let myself grieve, but not for too long. There was too much life left, too much to discover. I thought again of my mother's lighthouse story. The storms might come, the sky might darken, but I could stand. I would stand. And the next time I walked into a jewelry store, it would be for myself, not to wait for someone else to choose me, but because I'd finally chosen me.